Joe, nobody has been talked about more, in my opinion, about a potential amount of success probably this offseason more than Ole Miss, because Lane Kiffin and his staff went out in the portal. They got Walter Nolan, et cetera, Trey Amos, et cetera. They really cleaned up in the portal, getting Princely, Human Yellen. And it's begged the question for so long, and now that we're getting close to the season, could Ole Miss be a playoff team? Could they make a run? Are they really one of the good teams in the SEC? Tonight we do our deep dive on them. Mm-hmm. What says you about the Ole Miss Rebels?
So first of all, I tweeted about recently some clips of Princely Umanmielen, who has first-round upside, very, very gifted player. Walter Nolan and him fall into this category of players who I think weren't developed in the direction that they needed in order to hit their true potential. It felt like they both stagnated at Texas A&M and at Florida. And I really think that this is an opportunity for them to really ascend and to become two of the better defensive linemen in the country. Ole Miss had a really underrated defense last year. Pete Golding is a guy that we have propped up a ton.
From hundreds into the 50s, which was a massive improvement.
With that leadership of an Alabama-minded defensive coordinator, I really think that they're going to take some strides defensively, which is the biggest key. But I stand by what I think is the most important, is that since the beginning of last year, and you folks know who you are, that doubted Jackson Dart. A lot of people thought, oh, Jackson Dart's going to get benched for Spencer Sanders. And I said, watch. Jackson Dart is a lot better than you guys think he is. And still, we sit here and we don't give Jackson Dart the recognition that he deserves. He's one of those guys where his stats aren't necessarily gaudy, but when you put on the tape, you see a player that improves on a year-to-year basis, and more importantly, feels like he's got the mentality, the awareness, the decision-making, all of the things that you look for in a quarterback in their final year to take a huge step forward. I think that as their defense improves, and with all these weapons for him to work with Juice Wells and Trey Harris, the Jackson Dart is going to have an enormous season. He's one of my Heisman sleepers, and his success is going to be enough for them to have a 10-2 season. They have got a very winnable schedule to go 10-2, maybe play in the SEC championship game, but more importantly, go to the college football playoff and maybe knock off a Big 10 or Big 12 team that they play in the first round.
Well, let me ask you this. They were 10-2 last year. Wouldn't that be a little bit of a downfall if you're the same? I mean, everything that we're talking about them, Joe, from the aspect of what they brought in from the portal.
But wait, but but that 10-2 though, those two losses, they got embarrassed a little bit. I don't think that that's going to be the same case.
I don't think they got embarrassed by Alabama. And by the way, they don't play Alabama this year.
Well, they got smoked by Georgia. Which was bad.
Fair. I mean, but Joe, so they're 11-1. I mean, like that's what we're saying. And by the way, that game's at home. So, look, I'm just asking, do you think it would be a little bit of a downturn if you're the same exact record after you brought in one of the best portal classes ever?
No, and the reason why I don't think that it's a downturn, because 10-2 on paper is different than what we saw last year, where Alabama, they completely blew an opportunity to beat a team that they should have beaten. And Georgia, they looked like roadkill. I'm sorry, Ole Miss fans. I'm sorry to say this, but we all know that was not a competitive game. I think that this year is going to be very different. The reason why I say 10-2 is they just got a really tough draw for their two hardest games, which is having to play Georgia, which is a Death Star, and having to go to LSU. And LSU's probably pissed about last year. I'm not going to be crazy enough. I'm not an LSU fan, by the way, guys. I'm not an LSU fan. I lost a bet. I'm wearing this hat because of it. But to win on the road,
just take the hat off.
No,
just take
my
the
hair's
hat
messed up. I'm not taking the damn hat off. I'm
just saying for like next episode.
My point is that I just think that that's too difficult of a situation, just like the inverse last year, where LSU had a really good team and they couldn't beat Ole Miss on the road. So the 10-2 for me does not feel like a downgrade. It feels like a great season and a momentum builder for them to go on to go to the playoff. But more importantly, I mean, couldn't we sit here and make the case that a 10-2 SEC team goes to the SEC championship? I think that there's no clear-cut second team in the conference.
I mean, the second team could. The argument that you would have is, what if Alabama doesn't take a step back? What if Texas doesn't really take a step back? What if LSU figures things out defensively? Like, there are question marks there too. So I don't want to say 10-2 because, Joe, there's been a lot of years where 11-1 Alabama, 11-1 LSU faces an 11-1 Georgia. So I don't want to go there because, look, regardless if it's East and West, those teams didn't play each other in the regular season anyway. Like, they weren't playing each other. So, look, besides like LSU and Bama, I mean, look, I look at what they brought on defense. You look at the defensive line. I'm actually going to look elsewhere. I look at what they did at DB, bringing in Isaiah Hamilton, who had 4 interceptions a year ago. But, Joe, I think they brought in the best corner in the portal, and Trey Amos. I am very, very, very high on Trey Amos. Joe, I will tell you this. There's not a player on that defense that I think that Pete Golding was more excited to get more than Trey Amos because, Joe, look what he did in the SEC championship game. Yep. You were like, well, he didn't play a lot. He was sitting behind 2 what should have been first-round corners, okay, and Tyrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry. He comes out when there's an injury and he balls out. I think the kid can be a first-round pick. Like, that's how high I am on him. He's got length. He's got size. But, Joe, it's just in all 3 levels that they got better. You know, Chris Paul coming in from Arkansas. Everything that you're adding on the back end because of how good you can cover, Joe, is going to make that defensive line that you talked about so much better. Think about this. Joe, they added 21 sacks from the portal. 21 sacks from the transfer portal. Do you understand? That is ridiculous. Some teams don't get that literally in a season. So I look at them defensively and say, I know what I'm going to get from Lane majority of the time offensively. But, Joe, if they can start making stops and make more games competitive, that's what makes them more dangerous than anything they brought in offensively. Now, I will say this. I do have a couple of concerns for them. I'm not necessarily worried about them or concerned really about them at running back. Who's the guy there? You know, like, is it
I think they're pretty deep at running back, though. I think they might not have a premier player.
They're deep, but I just don't know if they have that premier player, and they might not need it. But look, Lane loves the running game. That's the biggest lie, is that Lane Kiffin is a pass-happy coach. No, he's not. He loves running the football. But, man, the weapons that they're going to have to work with on the outside with Jackson Dart, as you alluded to, Joe, I think the talent's real. And I do think that their ceiling could be 11-1. Okay, like I think that their ceiling could be, because the only thing that you would be talking about would be me, and saying their ceiling is that they beat LSU in Death Valley. I have them losing to the SEC champion. Other than that, I think they can run the table. Now, if they do that, Joe, they're going to get a rematch with Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Yeah. And to what you're talking about, I think every team has like a real. You can always pick one game that's the defining game. I don't think it's Georgia. I think it is that LSU game. Can you go on the road and can you beat LSU? And it's much easier said than done, but it's plausible. If they're as good as people think, then yes, it's doable for them to beat LSU.
Well, they go on back-to-back road games, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're at South Carolina one week, and then the next week they're at LSU, correct?
Trap. Yeah. I don't have the schedule up in front of me, but if that is the case,
I'm not saying it's a trap. What I'm saying, okay, is you're going on the road. Like, look, man,
back-to-back road games is the one thing you bring up all the time.
It's the one thing I bring up all the time. In the SEC, it's not favorable. Now, last year you had a lot of teams that happened to, and a lot of teams won back-to-back road games. Can they? And look, if you're going to take that next step, look, the toughest game that they have, or the game that they have to win the most, is LSU. And it's not because it's just the Magnolia Bowl, whatever. It's mainly due to the fact that, Joe, that game's going to be at night. And look, there's a coach on the other sideline, and Brian Kelly, who is going to want to get some revenge off of that. And their season rides on that too. So I look at Ole Miss being a game, Ole Miss versus LSU being the game. Joe, I think on October 12th, it's going to be the most premier game that you have.
Absolutely.
Like, without question. And I think Oregon plays Ohio State that day too. Maybe.
Oh, that one day has a ridiculous.
It's a ridiculous day. Yeah, ridiculous day. But if you want to talk about the shakeout of the SEC, you pretty much know the shakeout of the Big Ten. right? Like those, like the high profile game in the Big Ten is the top two dudes facing off. Well, the one in the SEC might be teams maybe 4 and 5, maybe 3 and 4 facing off, and it's a premier playoff spot here. Is there any concern from you? Let me ask you this. Is there any concern from you that they got too much from the portal and they don't have enough depth? Like injuries do happen.
Yeah, that's always something that we bring up where I think that they're fine on depth. I just think that we always have to acknowledge, hey, there's a lot of new faces in here. There's a shot that maybe so many new guys playing with one another. You still need to develop like a team chemistry, and it's not something that's just done overnight. It's the case in the NFL. It's the case in college football. It's something that just needs to take time for it to really mature. I think if there is one thing that I'm like maybe concerned about, I still don't know what the deal is with their offensive line. I'm hoping that it's going to be better. They added 3 new faces, 3 transfers that are coming into the mix. But I feel like every year we've talked about how underwhelming their offense, not underwhelming, but their offensive line has never been up to par with what's needed to succeed in the SEC on a week-to-week basis.
Joe, I've talked to some people on that staff. I don't think that they're worried about their O-line.
I guess all those new guys that they brought in, they feel pretty good about them.
I guess that they do. Look, man, here's what I will say. Lane does not have the excuse anymore of not having talent. Now, again, injuries can happen, and context has to enter when injuries are occurring. But, man, you wanted pressure. Look, Joe, the truth is Lane really didn't have pressure. Lane could go 9-3 at Ole Miss every year, and they would put up a statue of him. And they know that they would.
Yeah.
They would. I promise you they would.
Well, let me ask you this, though. At what point, wait, if Mark Stoops gets the treatment that he got last year, where all the Kentucky fans started to get spoiled and they started to be like, he's not going to get us past where we need to get to. At what point does that not happen with Ole Miss?
Well, first off, Lane's doing better than Mark Stoops, but no. Lane's not going to be there long enough. That's going to be another episode that y'all are going to have to tune into December. He's not going to be there. So
your conspiracy theories.
All right, I'll make a bet with you. You ready?
I don't like making bets with you, but sure. What is it?
Okay. You have to wear that specific hat every day on this show for the rest of your life.
No.
If Lane Kiffin does not become a candidate and or take.
Bad deal. That's a horrible. That is so lopsided. Hell no. He's going to become a candidate. He's going to be named for every opening that happens until he
All right, how
dies.
about if he takes the Florida job?
No, I'm not taking that bet.
All right. Because you know it's true. Look, Joe, I think that they're a playoff team. I think that at worst, and I would go at worst, I think they have a repeat of last year to some extent. They go 10-2. Joe, they're firmly in the playoff. Maybe they get a playoff game. That's where I am with them. Because here's the thing that's getting lost. I see a lot of SEC fans in particular saying, oh, well, they brought in all this talent. I think they're going to flop. And people forget of how good his coaching staff is.
Yeah.
Lane has been a great coach. The thing now is, now that you have all this talent, because Joe, look, he didn't have this at USC. Remember, they were going through scholarship reductions because of the Pete Carroll stuff that was going on. He has had some bad situations that he has not had this amount of talent around him. He's had some really good pieces, just not this amount. I don't think he's ever had a defense like this either.
I think you bring up a compelling conversation, though, is that if there is some sort of an underwhelm where they do finish, they would really need to F up to go 8-4. But if they go 9-3 and miss the playoff,
bottom floor.
If they go 9-3 and miss the playoff and lose a game that they're not supposed to, I don't think he will be rightfully criticized, I think, by the rest of the SEC. Maybe the fans aren't as upset, but I would argue that actually I push back on that. I think the fans would be really upset if they go 9-3, they miss the playoff, because there's clearly a commitment from the alumni base right now to fund what he's trying to build.
All right, fair.
I mean, we talk expectations with all these guys. I feel like as we talk the upside and the confidence that we have in them, it's also important to talk about if they fail to succeed, how much pressure is on them. Dan Lanning, there's less pressure. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.